Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas. Inside Tonight with Ashok Vyas program is a program where we try to hone our thinking skills with the help of our guest. And today I'm extremely delighted to be welcoming someone who has a journey that has enriched people around him in several ways. He is also a poet. He has many published books, starting from basic arts of marketing to make the best of your life. Uh, I would say when you try to see the kind of thinking uh, enrichment brought about by Prabhu Guptara ji, that is mind boggling, at least to me. We will learn more about him down the line, but let me have first the pleasure of welcoming Prabhu ji. Namaste. Welcome, sir.
Namaste. Namaste, Ashokji. And happy Diwali to you. Happy Diwali to everybody who's by chance listening to the program, watching the program. Very
Wonderful.
nice to be your guest. Thank you for asking me.
So, Prabhuji, I understand you are a British citizen.
I
Uh,
am, but I'm
and
also a Swiss citizen. I'm also overseas citizen of India. So we wear many hats. You know, we are Indians. We wear many hats. Sar pe lal topi rosi phir bhi dil
Dil hai
hai
Hindustani.
Hindustani.
Yeah. But I actually, based on what I read about you, and there was some place where you were introduced as Hindu international business analyst, and you are very deeply rooted in India, though as technically you are not Indian citizen. If I may request you to walk us through your formative years and what is it that led you to be a poet as well as have the kind of analytical thinking which takes you to the core of organization and business?
So that is, as you can imagine, a little complicated to answer briefly. So let me say, by God's grace, I have been very fortunate in my mentors, people who have guided me and taught me and led me. But I had the biggest grace of God in the generation in which I grew up. You know, I was born in 1949, that's immediately after independence. And the generation after independence, you may not think so now, but we were, first of all, very nationalist. Secondly, we were very open minded because we grew up under the influence of both Gandhiji and Nehruji. And even when we disagreed with both of them on many points, we were still influenced by both of them. How? Gandhiji for his unremitting nationalism, right? Nehruji for his remarkable vision and his ability to inspire people not just to throw out the British, which is what Gandhiji did, but to build our nation up so that we could rise in the community of nations to take our own place as leaders in the community of nations. So these two things drove us to live a very modest lifestyle, but at the same time to be very ambitious in our thinking. Simple living, high thinking was the slogan of my generation. Nowadays, also some people repeat it, but nowadays the repetition is a little hollow because simple living is not idolized by anybody. High thinking may be idolized, but simple living is not idolized by anybody now. So a few people of my generation are left who still believe in simple living and high thinking. And I was very fortunate by being admitted by sheer miracle to St. Stephen's College in Delhi, where I
Uh,
woke up
yeah,
intellectually.
allow me a quick interruption to
Ji, ji.
learn when you say simple living.
Hmm.
Do you mean simple living, meaning staying away from the comforts, or is it the external side of life or internal side of life? How you define
No,
simple?
internal has to be there if the external is to be there. But sometimes the internal may be there and the external may not be there. Then how do you yourself know what the reality is?
Right.
So external has to be there. Sometimes it is forced upon you,
Hmm.
right? But if you're voluntarily willing to live in any set of circumstances, then you know you have simple living.
I see.
I give you an example. A poor child may have nowhere to put his head and may have to sleep in a sewage pipe, you know. He may have to. He has no choice but to live simple life, right? But I have been living in palaces. I have had the honor and privilege of being in palaces. I've had the honor and privilege of sleeping in on the streets, not because I chose it, but because I had no option. So I have learned to be comfortable in all circumstances. You can get me to sleep standing up. I can go to sleep standing up. You can
So,
make me sleep on the floor. So long as I have one chadar to cover myself, I can go to sleep comfortably for the night. I can
so
eat simple food. I can eat very sophisticated food. And I'm equally happy.
Mhm.
So, simple living means being able to be very adjustable to any physical circumstances. That is
so
what Gandhiji taught me.
yeah. So
That is
somehow,
what all the great leaders have taught from Jesus downwards. Every leader has taught simple living, high thinking.
hmm. So what the way you describe simple living, I would say this is having flexibility also.
It
And
is.
if I go from Indian philosophy, then Srimad Bhagavad Gita also talks about evenness of mind or samatva. That also is pretty much what you are referring to as simple living. So now, being someone who is in the middle of what you say, I was not that close to when India became independent. Like I wasn't there as you were. So you said earlier people were practicing it, now not. What has changed? Is it because we have a lot of technology helping us to kind of improve so-called quality of life with comforts, or the approach?
I'm sure that has played a part in it. But we always have the choice to be attached to material wealth and comfort, or we have the capacity to treat material goods as being trusted to us as stewards. We're given these material blessings from God, and at the end of the day, we will be evaluated by God on how we have treated the wealth that He has given us, whatever wealth, little or much, He may have given us. So we can use the wealth for our own self indulgence, or we can use the wealth also to bless other people. And the question is, how do we do it? Now, in my generation, it was understood that however wealthy you were, you lived a modest lifestyle, less rich and ostentatious than you could afford, so that you could bless other people with the extra. Nowadays, people will spend hundreds of crores. You know what the situation is. Even on a single daughter's wedding, how many crores can be sent? How many hundreds of crores can be
Hmm.
spent? You know that. So it is not that this was unknown in the old days. You can go back there to the tradition of our kings and emperors. This was the tradition earlier also. But when Gandhiji came, he started a revolution in our consciousness, in our national consciousness. And that is what led to people living a very simple life. So if you were a follower of Gandhiji, in other words, if you were somebody who wanted to throw out the British, and you went to him for inspiration, for training, what did you have to do? You went to his ashram. First of all, you had to pray in the morning, right? You had to listen to readings from the Gita, Bible, Quran, and so on, right? And the hymns that were sung from the Muslim tradition, Hindu tradition, Christian tradition. You're a Christian, didn't matter, you had to learn Hindu songs. You're a Muslim, didn't matter, you had to learn Hindu songs, right? What was he trying to do? He was trying to bring us all, excuse me, my throat is troubling me a little bit
That's fine.
because of this allergy. So let me drink a little water.
So I'm actually delighted to be talking to Prabhuji, who is visiting, and he has given lectures at several places in United States, and it is my good fortune to be having this time with you. So please continue.
So Gandhiji was trying to bring us all together to be able to throw out the British, right? And when you went to his ashram, it didn't matter whether you were high caste or low caste. Everybody had to help in the kitchen, cutting, cooking, all that. Everybody had to clean the toilets, right? Didn't matter you were Brahmin or you were Shudra, didn't matter, right? Everybody helped in the kitchen and everybody cleaned the toilets. What was Gandhi trying to do? Gandhiji was trying to teach us all, however rich you are, you have to be willing to do work. Whoever you are, you have to learn to work with other people, whatever their values, whatever their background, whatever. So he was trying to bring all the differences in India together. That's what he was trying to do. So I come from that generation where we were trying to bring everybody together so that together we could throw out the British, together we could build up our nation, together we could take our place in the community of nations as a respected equal, not necessarily as a leader, because we did not believe in leadership in that sense. Gandhiji was a great leader, but he was a very simple, poor man. He went to meet the Queen of England, and what did he say when he was asked, "Why you? What do you think she will think of you wearing only dhoti?" He said, "I don't need to worry about it. She will be wearing enough for both of us." You remember
Mm.
that? Huh?
Yeah,
She'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
wearing enough for both of us. I don't need to worry about it. So his simple lifestyle did not make him a junior or an intellectual inferior. The fact that he was not an elected member of any council. There were many Indians who were elected. At that time, you remember, Indians were allowed to vote to become members of the regional governments. You remember that, huh? He was not elected to any office. He was once elected to Congress leadership, but that was all. He was not elected to any position of authority in the system. But in
Actually,
spite of that, he represented the nation. Why? Because he had a moral authority. Everybody accepted the fact that he was a leader. Why? Because of his qualities, because of his values. And that was what was great about him.
so there are, since you have so much, what should I say, impact of Gandhiji, and you must be aware that there is a re-look at the stand taken by Gandhiji, and that is being
Of course.
interpreted. And
Of course.
I don't want to get into that side because it will be a different kind of discussion. I want to stay with you, so I'm bringing the aspect of poetry, and I think poetry is also one way of search for truths. And
It is
Gandhi's autobiography is also
correct.
Satya ke Prayog, my
Bilkul.
experiments with truth.
With
So,
truth. Ji,
so
ji.
now allow me to share some information about you. In addition to being the author of the Basic Arts of Marketing, which was also translated into Portuguese. And then you also have been a part of the top executive teams in the global 100 companies and their IT competence. Then another interesting aspect, skipping uh, several publications where you have contributed, you are also a very well established poet, and your individual poems published in the Illustrated Weekly of India. Then,
I wouldn't say I'm well established. I'm occasionally published by all kinds of people who are foolish enough to publish my poems. So obviously I get published, or they like my poetry somehow stupidly, so I get
okay, so
published.
yeah, let me request you to share what poetry means to you and how it has helped you in sort of uh, realizing a sense of fulfillment or the way it contributes to you.
So I started writing poems totally, so to speak, accidentally. And what I mean by that is, I had not the faintest notion that someday I would write poetry. And what happened was, I was a young man. I fell in love with a girl, and it was at a student conference. And of course, in those days, you had no means of expressing this or showing this to each other, right? But when her father came to pick her up after the conference, a group of us, men and, I mean, young men and young women, all went to see her off, right? So her father came in a very luxurious foreign car. In those days, a foreign car was really a rarity. So it showed us very clearly what level of society he belonged to, what level of business success he belonged to, right? And by the way, he looked at all of us, he looked at all of us with such घृणास, हिंदी we say घृणा, इतनी घृणा से देखा हम सब लोगों को कि what are you guys doing with my daughter kind of attitude. I don't know if he intended it or not, that I don't know, but that's what I felt, that he was somehow looking down on us with real घृणा. So I knew I had no chance. I mean, anyway, I had not expressed anything to her or said anything to her or showed it in any way, right? But I felt somehow disappointed. In English we say jilted. That means as if you had expressed your love and been refused, as if, right? And out of that feeling came a very short poem, few lines. I happened to share this with one of my very close friends who was a poet. He used to write poetry, he used to share his poems with me. And I said, his name, I said, you write poetry, you share with me. I've also written one poem. say, oh, hey, this is a very nice poem. Why did you write it? When did you write it? Then I had to tell him the background. Then, of course, he was sympathetic to my feelings. But he said, but this poem is very good. You should send it off for publication. I said, Arey yaar, pehli baar likha hai, sorry. Yeah, first time I've written a poem, who's going to read it? No, 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 please send it off. So no, 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 I will send it if you won't send it. So he insisted and pushed me into sending it to Nissim Ezekiel. Nissim Ezekiel, Indian Jew, was then the editor of the poetry page of the Illustrated Weekly of India, which at that time was the largest circulation magazine, English language magazine in the country. And Nissim Ezekiel, as you know, is the father of modern Indian poetry. He's called the father of modern Indian poetry, partly because he was a very good promoter of good quality English poetry. And that page was one of the ways in which he did it. So before I knew what was happening, Nissim Ezekiel, by the way, never wrote back and said he had accepted the poem. But we discovered he had accepted it by the poem appearing in the Illustrated Weekly of India. And then, to my astonishment, Professor P. Lal from Calcutta, who was at that time the only consistent and at all significant publisher of poetry in India, he used to run writers' workshop in Calcutta, what was in those days called Calcutta. He wrote to me, care of the Illustrated Weekly, and Nissim Ezekiel then kindly forwarded it to me. And he said, dear Prabhu, etc., Guptara, etc., have you written any other poems? Because I'd love to publish a collection of your poems. I'd only written one poem. So, somebody's expecting a collection, you better write some to get it published. So in haste, and somehow I wrote some more poems over a few weeks and months, sent it off to him. He was kind enough to publish the lot. Even though I'm afraid the quality of those poems were not, at least all of them were not up to the standard of the first poem, which I think was pretty good, actually, when I look back. Beginner's luck, So my first collection of poems was published. Then later on, my second collection of poems was also published by him. And over the years, many people have published my poems. I've won a few prizes and so on. And so I write love poetry. I write poetry on political matters. I write poetry on philosophical and religious subjects. I'm moved in different ways. Sometimes I'm moved by my emotions, as I was with that first poem. My emotions led to that poem.
So, if I may take the liberty of asking you, what happened to the source which gets the credit for your first poem?
I don't know. She disappeared from my life because,
Okay.
she came from a certain kind of family. She happened to be at that conference. And after that, in those days, there was no way of keeping track of people. Nowadays, even if somebody does not want to be kept track of, you can still keep track of them from a distance, right? Unless they really want to hide, they want to wipe out all trace of themselves on the internet, which you can also do.
Difficult.
But it's a bit difficult. Even if you want to do it, it's a bit difficult. I know one or two people have done it, but it's an expensive, long-winded process to really make yourself anonymous on the internet, So, but in those days, it was not easy to find people.
So I'm glad you mentioned you write poetry which are romantic poems, and you also write on politics and philosophy, and so that also is quite a wide range. Is there any particular theme that appeals to you more than the other?
Not really. So I've also written on on nature poems. I've written on all kinds of poems. So what happens is something moves me, either my emotions or a thought which triggers off, or a phrase which triggers off, or a musical rhythm that triggers off a poem. And the difficulty is always, you're not always in a place and a readiness to be able to grab that inspiration. But if you have the readiness to grab that inspiration and interrupt whatever else you're doing and go at that time with the inspiration, sometimes a very good poem, short or long, can result. And sometimes what happens is it's only a phrase, or it's only a little line or two or three, and later on you return to it and somehow the inspiration has disappeared. But sometimes the inspiration comes back, and sometimes the inspiration comes back in a different way from what it was originally. So you go on to complete the poem. That happens too.
Yeah, let's briefly talk about your presence in the corporate world and how being a poet, because in general the impression about poets is that they are impractical people,
Ji.
Whereas in the organization, what you are guiding people, or that has to be based on some solid foundations with the applications that would yield the kind of results. Whereas poetry has more freedom and sort of
Yeah,
flight of
correct.
imagination. So, how these two sides work for you together?
So in the corporate world, I have almost never used my poems, but I have used them occasionally where I felt they are appropriate. And unlike a really great writer like Solzhenitsyn, who memorized all his own poems in prison because he was in prison and he could not write, he was not given paper and pen or anything. So he had to memorize his own poems. Uh, and he could therefore recite his own poems very easily. I have not had that gift from God. So I write my poems and then basically I forget them. So if you ask me to recite one of my poems, I can't do it. Gulzar and other great poets can recite their poems from their hearts and their minds. I need to read my poems. And that's partly because I work very hard on finishing them. And that comes to a little bit from my training. Like a carpenter has to be very precise in the way he cuts the wood, and very precise in the degree to which he polishes the wood, right? In order for
Beautiful.
it to fit together. So, in the same way, my poems are very finely made. You may not like the way I write them, but from my point of view, I try to make them as perfect as possible. But anyway, my point is simply that I have not used them for those two reasons. One, because they may not be appropriate to use in that context. Second, even if they're appropriate to use, I can't remember my own poems, so I have to
No,
read
no.
them.
So let me share the drift to my question. Uh,
Ji,
Using or not using is another thing, but the
ji.
person who is a poet is the person who is there, referring to organization structure and talking about result oriented approach or
Yes,
motivating, etc.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So on those things, of course, you have to take a completely professional approach. And so I was fortunate in that I was very well coached and guided by many important people in my thinking and in my practice. As a result of which, I did consultancies both for small corporations, for small municipalities, for small government departments, and for gradually international corporations, not in the US, but all the way from Europe to Japan. And as a result of that, when I did my first two assignments for the largest bank in the world, which happened to be in Switzerland, I was, by God's grace, successful in them. And then they made me an offer. And as a result of that, I joined the bank. And when I joined the bank, they asked me to do something very unusual, which had not been done by at least their bank in their entire history. They'd been going 200 years or so. They'd never done it in their entire history. And that was to unleash or start a process of internationalization of their bank. They were already international in their operations, but they wanted to international the mindset of their corporation and internationalize the procedures of the organization, so that the bank became international in its spirit, in its nature, in its DNA, not just in its operations. So that is the process I was helping. And I was helping it by uh, partly speaking and lecturing and contributing to sessions and things like that, partly by initiating think tanks on topics which I thought would help the internationalization of the bank. And I fortunately did not have to make a business case. Fortunately, I could gather the best brains in the bank along with the best brains from outside the bank to work together on a topic of my choice, for which I did not have to get pre approval. I had a small budget, and other parts of the bank also had a small budget. They could also propose topics, and if they proposed topics and we agreed to work together, they could also contribute 50% of the expenses of running the think tank. At the end of the think tank, I only had to, well, the chairman of the bank, when I was appointed, asked to have breakfast with me. And after breakfast, in Switzerland, there's a very clear division of social life and business life. So when you're having breakfast, you don't talk business. Finished breakfast, you can talk business, even though you're sitting at the same table. So he says to me, Prabhu, I'm very delighted you joined the bank. And you are welcome to introduce any topic. There is no taboo topic. We are all open to all ideas, new ideas. We are open to being challenged on anything. We are completely open, and you're free to write as long a report as you want at the end of your think tanks. But please be aware that I only read the first page of any report you write.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
Yeah, yeah. So
So, excuse me.
take your time. Take your time. Uh,
So,
Let me fill in the information again. I'm talking to author, publisher, and philosopher Dr. Prabhu Guptara ji, who is visiting and is addressing. And we will shortly be concluding this series, no, this part of our conversation. But we will have more conversations with him, and one of them would be on his book, "Make the Best of Your Life." That also I'm looking forward to. So as we conclude, Guptara ji, how your experience of being in
just
the bank?
briefly,
Yeah.
just briefly, the result was that these one-page proposals or contributions, conclusions from the think tank went to the board. And at the end of it, the board, of course, discussed these. And for each of these, the decision was good idea, bad idea, obviously, very clearly. Bad idea, obviously, forget. Good idea, but sometimes the timing is wrong. Good idea, we want to take it forward, but thank you very much without you. Or good idea, we want to take it forward. You please participate in the work group. Or good idea, would you please chair the work group by which it can be taken forward? And over the course of 15 years, on average, every second year, one of my ideas was picked up and implemented by the bank and made some major changes. For example, we went into internet banking 2 years before our nearest competitor went into internet banking. We were involved in entry strategies into different countries. We were looking at the legal environment for hedge funds, all kinds of topics we looked at in those 15 years when I ran these think tanks. And it was a wonderful experience for me to have the freedom to do what I wanted without having to make a business case for it. So the guys who came after me had to make business case approaches. For example, when we launched philanthropic initiatives in the bank, it came out of one of the think tanks that I ran. But the man who then took it forward and started implementing it in the bank, he had to make a business case.
Beautiful,
And
beautiful.
unfortunately, as a result of making the business case on an unfashionable topic, he lost his job. His successor, a woman, who then took up the challenge to implement this philanthropic initiative in the bank, made a business case, and also lost her job. Her successor, another man, also took the initiative up. He succeeded. So it took my effort, which did not cost me anything, it came out of my normal working practice, and the sacrifice of the careers of two individuals to move the largest bank in the world into the philanthropic space. And today, as you may be aware, this bank is one of the largest managers of philanthropic funds in the world.
Wow.
But no thanks to me, thanks to the willingness of two people to sacrifice their careers for the purpose.
Whether they did it willingly or not is something we will not get into. They ended up in that situation. But what I am finding fascinating is the way thoughts have their own way of growing like trees and then
Correct.
influencing the world in ways which is
Correct.
amazing. So
Yeah.
we will have more from Dr. Prabhu Guptara ji. It's such a delight and joy to be sitting with you,
Thank you very
thanking
much.
him.
And with you.
Uh, and I hope you enjoyed these reflections, which takes us to several sides, starting from India's independence and whatnot. So wonderful. Thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for being with us. This is Ashok.